We've had a huge response to this event topic, and it's understandable given that rates of mental illness are on the rise and now represent a larger share of the mental health burden worldwide. Most of us in this room has or knows someone who has experienced mental illness. And this raises the question of whether we're approaching the issue of well-being and happiness in the right ways. And is happiness just an elusive goal? So let's find out what some of the academics and writers think. I would like to introduce our panel. On the far end is Associate Professor Brock Bastian, social psychologist and author of The Other Side of Happiness from Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences. Dr. Peggy Kern, Senior Lecturer at the Centre for Positive Psychology from the Melbourne Graduate School of Education. Professor Mark Wooden, Director of the Hilda Survey project, Australia's first large-scale household panel survey at the Melbourne Institute of Applied Economic and Social Research. And Ms. Jill Stark, author of Happy Never After, Why the Happiness Fairy Tale is Driving Us Mad and How I Flipped the Script. Welcome to you all. Brock, I'd like to start with you. In the Western world, it often seems we're in the midst of a mental health epidemic. And so as a social psychologist, do you believe that there has been a real rise in mental health issues?
Yeah, sure. So you started with the hardest question first, yeah. I feel. So I mean, the data seems to suggest, at least since about the 1990s, from the last 20 or 30 years, it actually seems to have plateaued a little bit in terms of the rate of mental illness reported around the world. But as you pointed out before, the percentage of the world health burden, or the overall health burden, it is going up. So it seems as though we're certainly not treating it as well as we might be treating other things. And the other thing that's interesting is that the use of antidepressants is also going up. So it's sort of a complex answer to, I think, in some ways. I think that, we're certainly in the news, we're hearing things about, anxiety at the moment really becoming quite prevalent. So I think, anecdotally, it seems like there is this outcrop of or sort of rise in mental health issues. At the same time, some of the data is suggesting it's plateaued. I think before 20 or 30 years ago, there certainly did appear to be some rises going on there. So, yeah, I wonder whether, part of what we're seeing is also how we're responding to that as well, how people are coping with that. And again, the tendency to be, I guess, reaching or using antidepressants perhaps at a higher rate, or an increased rate, maybe says something about that too.
Well, I'm sure we'll touch on that later as well. So, Jill, you speak about your personal experience in your recent book and of your struggles with mental health. You'd been anxious and depressed on and off throughout your childhood, teenage years into your adulthood. Can you just give us a sense of what that's been like for you?
Yeah, I could tell you what that's like. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, anxiety is something I've struggled with since I was a teenager. Even now, like this sitting here, like looking at all your lovely faces, it's still quite terrifying for me. But I can't see you all at the back, but I think that you're all not going to harm me, even though my fight or flight response would tell me otherwise. I think anyone who struggles with anxiety would know that this kind of situation can be quite challenging. And I spent the last 3 months touring this book, and it's still a challenge, but I'm getting there. And so I think the reason that I like to have to go to these events is to show that, this is something that we all struggle with. For me, I was probably 16 when I was diagnosed with depression for the first time. And I think that label was in some ways quite a burden, and I look at a lot of that in the book and how that kind of shaped me. I was a very anxious child much earlier than that. I didn't really know what that was about, but that kind of morphed into an anxiety disorder. It's something I've struggled with, as I say, throughout my life. And then I wrote my first book, High Sobriety, and that was, it went far. It sold really well, and it was received very well, and it was a kind of a dream come true. And I thought, you know, that was it, that happiness was going to be mine, and everything would be tied up with a neat bow. And it turned out to be quite different. I suffered quite a serious breakdown. I think we still call it that. I don't know if we call it that anymore. I like to see it as a breakthrough, not a breakdown in the end. But yeah, and I think that's what I explore in this book is what does it mean to be happy, and all of the things that I thought would bring me that happiness were actually kind of red herrings. So although mental health is still a challenge for me, I think that ultimately what I've come to in this book is a much more of a hopeful message, I think, and realizing that it's okay to not be okay, and that happiness is not at all what well, certainly for me, what I thought it was, and accepting that. And accepting that, I think, Brock, you talk about this a lot in your work and in your book, that the idea that we should be happy as our default position as humans is actually what gets us into a lot of trouble. And I think that's where a lot of our struggles come from, is that denial of reality. Not that we should always be suffering, but I think the Buddhists have got it right by saying that life is suffering, and that's not a depressing statement to me. It's quite liberating, and it's realizing that to be fully alive, fully awake, and fully human is to experience the entire facet of human emotions, and happiness is just one of those.
Well, we'll go further into that too. That's very rich pickings, I think. Mark, I'm interested in whether the trends of over time support this concept of a mental illness epidemic from your survey.
Yeah, okay. So I just begin by saying I run something called the Hilda Survey. It's been said before. Stands for the household income labour dynamics. It has a strong emphasis on work and income and family. Essentially, it's a study of life in Australia. When you do that, you can't avoid asking people about how they feel in life, about their satisfaction, about their moods, etc. So it's a very wide study. We now follow something like 18,000 Australians. We've been doing it. They follow the same ones every year since, almost the same ones, because you marry someone, we add your new spouse. You have children, we add your children. Okay, so we've been doing that since 2001, asking the same questions. And so one of the very simple questions we ask just is, how satisfied are you with your life? Not quite the same as happiness, satisfaction, on a scale of 0 to 10. And in the latest survey, 2/3 of Australians are picking 8, 9 or 10. And another quarter are picking 6 or 7, so not great, but on the upper end of the scale. Only 7% of Australians are picking a very low score, okay, so expressing some dissatisfaction. So that seems good. It's not quite the same as happiness. But at the same time, we also include these sort of measures of anxiety and mood. They're self-reported, they're not clinical diagnosis at all. And just in the most recent years, actually we can date it. It's 2009, 10, or around that period. Sort of coincidental with, you know, sort of some economic troubles at the time. And the measure of using the Kessler K10 measure of people who have symptoms of anxiety and mood disturbance of being high to psychological stress, that's noticeably increased. I mean, from a small proportion, from sort of 5% to 7%, but quite a noticeable increase, something to be worried about. At the same time as the proportion of people who are saying they're, you know, content with their life is remaining very high, and if anything, slightly rising. So you've got this interesting conundrum.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it seems almost counterintuitive that on one hand people are satisfied with their life, on the other hand more mental illness is being reported.
Well, more anxiety at least. I think we do have to remember that it's a survey, and so we are missing some people. Not everyone responds to surveys, and I suspect, well, we know that people with some of the most serious problems are likely the sorts of people who are not responding and participating in big surveys, no matter how large we are, and no matter how much we pay them. We do pay them.
You do?
Yeah, we do. So that's to make sure we get those low-income people in who are obviously typically averse to surveys, but are much more responsive to the financial incentive.
And I wonder, Brock, if this is related to, you look into the pressure that we have on us in today's society to be happy. Tell us what some of the research has shown you about what that pressure does to us.
Yeah, I think, I mean, in a sense, it's kind of interesting. We have this sort of value system that we've placed on top of our emotional states. As Jill said, you know, we have this whole range of emotions we've evolved to feel, and somewhere along the way, we decided that half of those were positive and half of those were negative, which is itself interesting because actually the right way of just, you know, referring to them as pleasant and unpleasant which isn't really positive and negative, but we sort of have this overlay of it. And so that really shapes how we respond to those emotions. And I think that overlay isn't just something we've all each individually come up with, but I think it's something which is communicated in our society more broadly. It's a set of cultural norms around this. So it does communicate that, you know, being on the positive side of that emotional spectrum, you know, that the 50% of it that's pleasant seems to be the place that we should be in order to be successful and to be achieving things in life, to be getting ahead, to be someone who's worth knowing. And that tends to set up something which is really quite unachievable. And it also sets up, in a way, that devaluation of the negative side of that spectrum, or the unpleasant emotions. And so then when we inevitably slip from, you know, what we think we should be feeling, which is the positive stuff, we inevitably slip over into the negative stuff, then that framework leads us to respond quite badly to that. Then we start to feel depressed about the fact we're feeling depressed today, or we get anxious about the fact we've had an anxious feeling. We panic about, you know, having panic attacks. So in a sense, it's sometimes that secondary response, and it's the way that we frame that negative affect which really determines how we sort of get through life. And I suppose that pressure to stay on the positive side of the spectrum is part of what's leading us to sort of devalue and see these other things as, I guess, a hindrance. You know, whenever we slip down, we're seen as a hindrance to being where we should be, where we need to be, where society wants us to be. Mm. Yeah.
Jill, you experienced that very much, didn't you? That you were left, I think you said you were left devastated and void.
Yeah, I described it as a sort of a deep emptiness, which sounds very depressing. It's a really hopeful book, honestly. It is. It's not a tale of woe. It's a tale of I think from despair to clarity. Not. I think the books that I saw out there in the self-help market were very much sort of like a phoenix rising from the ashes, and it was always like you'd kind of catch anxiety and depression like a cold, and then you'd have a couple of sessions of CBT and you'd emerge unscathed and cured. I think life is not like that. So for me, I realized that it's a journey from really not understanding myself to a clarity around what makes me tick and what makes us tick as humans, and that has led to a much more sense of comfort with my discomfort when I experience it. Yeah, for me, exactly as Brock says, the expectation that I should be happy and I should be at the top of my game because all of the things that were meant to make me happy, I had them. I just, written a best-selling book. I bought my own apartment. I was dating a footballer. That arguably is not a good thing. But yeah, and honestly, I've written 100,000 words about my deepest pain and the human condition, and all people want to know is which football player you're sleeping with. But anyway, take that one to my grave. So yeah, I had all of these things that were meant to make me happy, and yeah, I had this yawning chasm inside me of why do I feel so empty, and that's what I unpack in this book. But the expectation that we should be happy all the time, or that we should reach these life goals, and we plan for the birth, not the baby, the wedding, not the marriage. We're always plodding along to this sort of end point. And I reached my end point and I was like, well, what else is there? And I think very much the more aspirational we are, the more we want. And the research really backs that up. Like the average amount of money that you need to reach levels of happiness is $75,000 US. Anything above that, there's no material gain in your happiness scores. So once you've got the basics that you need for happiness, so like food and shelter and the sense of belonging, you don't really, money's not going to buy that for you. Success is not going to buy that for you. The adulation of people around you, the external validation that we get from social media, I think once I stripped all of that back, and it was sort of this sort of gravity-defying limbo that I was left in, where I was like, okay, that's not working anymore. What do I need? And that was what I embarked on in this book in the last few years, is trying to figure out, well, what is it that makes us happy? And in the end, what I discovered is we're asking the wrong question. As you said, it's not about happiness, it's satisfaction or a sense of fulfillment or a sense of being rewarded or having a rewarding life and a whole life. And a whole life means that you are going to experience sadness and disappointment and frustration and anger. And unfortunately, we teach kids that that's not normal. My parents from a very early age said to me, I grew up in Scotland in a perfectly affluent middle class background, and they said, we just want you to be happy. That's what parents say to their kids as a way of unconditional, an expression of unconditional love. And I think maybe we need to sort of reframe that, because that gave me, as an anxious child, the expectation that I should be happy all the time, and when I wasn't, I thought there was something wrong with me.
So Peggy, you're an academic in the Centre for Positive Psychology. Even that concept, positive psychology, is a bit pressurising. Tell us about the concept of positive psychology and how it approaches some of these issues we're raising.
Yeah, certainly. So I think the question I get the most when I say, you know, I study positive psychology, and people are like, as opposed to negative psychology. And so I just come back and say, no, I'm a negative psychologist who studies well-being. So positive psychology is an area of research and practice that focuses on bringing out optimal development and functioning in individuals, organizations, communities. And so, when we look through history, across a lot of fields, much of the focus has been on fixing dysfunction. In psychology, a lot of it has been treating mental disorder and the challenges that are there. And that's a lot of important work has happened through that. In medicine, it's a lot about restoring health or normal functioning. And a couple decades ago, the fields came about to say, well, we know a lot about how to help to kind of restore normality, but we actually don't know what it means to actually live well. And so the field is really formed around this idea of what does it actually mean to live well, to not just simply survive life, but to really thrive. And I use the word optimal function because I think optimal is actually very different than actually being happy all the time. It actually means that we can actually handle both the ups and downs of life. It's actually accepting that all of that is actually a part of things, so it's actually more about a full life. And so as part of that, that's actually understanding what that actually means for you and those around you, and how we actually move towards that. I do think actually one of the biggest problems I see oftentimes in positive psychology is there's a huge misconception that it's all about happiness. And even when I started in this whole area, I really had this perception that it's just this happyology. It's that there are people that just smile all the time. It doesn't really matter what has happened. But it's really much, and I think even why we have to have some of these conversations about the problems of that pursuit of happiness is because of some of those misconceptions that have actually gone on. But really it's about saying, well, we actually want to understand all of human functioning, both the positives and negatives. For those who are struggling, how can we help you feel better? For those who are doing well, how can we actually help support that as we kind of navigate the seas of life?
So, and you're looking quite closely at young people. What's your sense of the mental well-being of young people, and what are the factors that are playing into perhaps challenges for young people?
Yeah, and I think with some of the statistics, it's actually kind of challenging to say, well, kind of what are the statistics that we're hearing all of the time versus some of the pressures that young people are dealing with. It is adolescence and childhood and whatnot. There's always been different challenges that are there. With things like social media and technology and whatnot, we are seeing the pace of things has sped up very much, whereas things like mental health and whatnot might have been more of a private matter before. Now it can actually be broadcast around the globe instantaneously, such that people's entire lives can actually be on display. So this is creating some different pressures on some of our young people. We're also seeing some changing family structures, societal structures and whatnot. We're seeing many more single parent families, different structures. We're much more mobilized, and so you have people where you used to have multiple generations living together or in small, close connected communities. You're seeing a lot more isolation going on, both within families and across families. So these are creating some different pressures. Within the schools themselves, we see different pressures on young people around performing on exams. We are seeing a lot of pressures around academic performance. Over the past sort of decade, there's been the rise of high-stakes testing, things like NAPLAN and other tests like that, that even though we say we want our young people to be happy, we kind of, we bring that alongside of you'll be happy if you achieve well on this exam, and if you get into the right uni, and if you get the right job, and sort of all those what should happen in life. And so when you're a young person, number one, there's that pressure to actually reach that perception. And number two is the challenge of what happens when you feel like you're not actually on track with that. And I think oftentimes the pressure that's on young people to perform is not actually explicit, because I don't think we actually recognize as the pressure that we're putting on young people or even the expectations that we have, but it's actually ingrained in how kind of some of the values of our society. So there's a lot of different factors that are converging together to create some different pressures on both our young people and those who work with them as well.
And Jill, in your book, you refer to that pressure from social media as the fairy tale filter. It's a comparison culture. We're comparing ourselves to others all the time, and often unfavourably. That was a pressure for you as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think I do want to stress that I don't think that the evidence is there to suggest that social media is causing our mental health problems, but I think for those of us who are struggling, it can exacerbate. And certainly for me, I mean, I think the research is good around that, around if you're already displaying depressive symptoms, then Facebook and Instagram can be quite problematic. For me, social media was, when I was quite unwell, I had to take myself off all of it because I realized that fighting with News Corp columnists on Twitter was a bit of a canary in the coal mine for my mental health. So that was one of the things where the compulsive nature and the angry, shouty nature of platforms like Twitter were not particularly helpful for me, but Facebook and Instagram, even though, I was at this time a few years ago, in my late 30s and completely on an intellectual level understood that what I was seeing on Facebook was put through the Facebook fairy tale filter, and everyone just seemed so happy, and everyone seemed to belong, and everyone seemed so normal, and everyone seemed so sane, and there was me completely unable to work as a journalist, and just feeling like I was completely abnormal, and so and I just had to take a break from it. And I think I have two nieces who are teenagers, and I think for them, they don't know any other way, and I don't think it's practical to say that we shouldn't have social media, but I think we just need to understand that if it's hard for us as adults, then it's going to be increasingly difficult for young people, and so that I try very much through my own social media now. I try to be less compulsive. I'm definitely not fighting with people as much on Twitter anymore. And I try with my Facebook and Instagram posts to be very honest and to not filter out all of the messy parts of life that make us human, because I think that's where the fairy tale filter can really play into that idea that we should be happy all the time, and my toilet broke recently, and I put that on Instagram because I was like, right in the middle of my glamorous author tour, I've got a plumber and he's charging me $900 to fix my broken toilet. So, that's, I think, just about being a bit more real about how life is, so that, as I say in this book, we get to the point now where you have filters. There's these apps that you can buy to face tune yourself, so that I'm like, I look amazing. I look like I'm 21. Well, I'm 42. That's the reality. We're literally jealous of people who don't exist. That's where we're at. So I think just being a bit more honest about it and giving young people the skills that they need to survive in a modern world and to understand that what they're seeing is not real all the time.
So Brock, this is very much a part of your research on pain, this concept of pain. You see, pain is really important. Yeah. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and so I guess I mean pain in a broad sense, in terms of not pleasure. But also I guess there's a lot of different kinds of pain. But broadly, I think what's important is to start a conversation around what are the positive sides of this so seemingly derided set of emotions on the negative side of the spectrum, and what are the sorts of things that these things could do for us. Why would we want them in our lives in the first place? If it's not just about getting rid of them, then is there something, is there some benefit to them, or is there something we can get from them? And I guess at the broadest level, it's about recognising that, well, inevitably we are going to have these things, and in actual fact, if we don't, the idea of an endlessly pleasant, sort of joyous lifestyle full of endless joy, endlessly, forever, never ending, starts to feel a little bit like it isn't quite what you expected. And so, you start to realise that actually, hang on a sec, that goal I've been heading towards isn't really quite what it seems. And I do actually want to have a little bit of the other side of this part of my life in my life. And then when you stop to think about the way we behave, and what gives value to our lives, a lot of what we do is actually seeking out some of these negative experiences. A lot of the most meaningful things aren't very meaningful. It doesn't really, it's not very exciting to graduate from your degree at university if you couldn't have failed it somewhere along the way. There's no sense of achievement there if you didn't take that challenge on with the full knowledge that you could have failed. People run marathons not because they're pleasant, right? I mean, it'd be absolutely pointless running a marathon that was just pleasant. Well, exactly. So we actually find that we're seeking out these experiences more than we realise, because they actually give us a lot of pleasure and joy and satisfaction and meaning as well. So I think it's recognising that, and then of course there's the other part of it, which is, some of us get stuck in those experiences, like Jill has told us about, and that's not something we choose, not something you'd want to be, have happen to you. But if all you've got is this sort of black box negative view of what you're experiencing, then how can you possibly cope well with it? How can we teach people to cope well with their negative experiences if all we tell them is, hey, it would be so great if you were happy or feeling more positive, wouldn't it? And that doesn't really give you the tools you need. So it's about understanding, so what can we take from this? How can we respond to it better? And recognising that actual fact, there is some value there. There's some real value there. Yeah. And
there's a sense that there are real opportunities to build resilience and skills to cope with whatever is dished out next.
It's very hard to develop resilience if you're not exposed to something which is challenging you. You need something there to press against, to resist against, to actually build that resilience in the first place. So it's I think, a really critical part of that too. Yeah.
So that resilience, Peggy, what can you do in the educational setting to bring that to young people? And I think there's a sense that that young people aren't allowed to experience pain or embrace pain.
Yeah, so it's been interesting over the kind of past decade or whatever. There's been a rising interest in positive psychology, well-being, this whole space in our schools. I know a lot of schools, they now have well-being coordinators and others that are really focused on this well-being space. And I think a lot of that is that reaction and concern over the mental health issues that we're seeing. And we're saying, well, how can we actually help support our young people more? And I think actually part of the challenge of that is that then well-being ends up getting intertwined with happiness. And so we want to have our young people feeling good, and it can actually have the unintended consequence of actually harming our young people when they feel a pressure of, I'm supposed to be happy, and Bobby just broke up with me and I'm not feeling happy, there must be something wrong with me. And so all of a sudden something that should be a normal emotion is actually taken to be something, well, there's an actual problem with me. And so one thing we're doing a lot in the schools is actually saying, well, how can we give our young people skills to both understand themselves, but then also manage things well and understand that there is both the highs and lows of things. We see things like building perseverance and resilience. And so there's a lot that we can do both around thinking styles and around behaviors and reaching out to support to understand my own strengths and what are the resources that are actually around me so that it's not just about feeling good all the time, but it's actually about, how can I actually sit with that discomfort that's there and move through it so I can actually learn and grow from it, as opposed to actually crippling me. And so it's actually working with strategies to actually start to build that sense of resilience, as well as some of that acceptance and that knowledge of, when is this something that's okay? When is this something that's beyond me? And so in which case, where can I go for support to actually navigate both the challenges within school itself, but then also as you go on in life as well?
So Mark, throughout life, from your research, what can you tell us about which different life events and conditions affect our level of well-being?
Well, all life events have the potential to affect that in any direction. I mean, in the Hilda Survey, we can observe all sorts of things happening in people's lives: marriage, divorce, separation, going to jail, getting assaulted, some major financial shock, adverse event, deaths in the family, deaths of friends. All these things are observed because they happen in people's lives. And I guess the good news is that from the people who have looked at this particularly, not me per se, but other users of our data, we have 3,000 of them around the world who are using the data, they show that the average person's response to this, that they have some effects, they're quite modest, and they rebound quite quickly. So it fits with the idea that people are pretty resilient on average. The average person is well functioning, is resilient, is able to cope with enormous things in their lives, sort of, etc. Now we can't focus on the most severe events. The number of people whose small child dies unexpectedly is fortunately very small numbers in our data. But so the good news is that they are very resilient, and it doesn't really matter what event. I mean, the ones that had the biggest effect were the deaths in the family. Okay, large effects in the short run. And when I say the short run, 6 months, 12 months. Okay, but two years later, they're reporting similar contentment with life. Okay, this doesn't mean this wasn't a traumatic event and didn't have big effects on their feelings at the time, but they get on with it. So the real issue, I think, is what about the people who don't?
Yeah.
Okay, so that minority of people who aren't the average, who struggle to cope, who for whatever reason don't have the coping mechanisms, don't have the support networks, didn't get the right treatment or whatever, and then all sorts of bad things can potentially flow from there.
And that's a very difficult area for the type of research that you do, isn't it? To really get the complexity.
Yeah, I think I'm moving out of my area at this space. Over to these guys.
So Jill, you prefer to call, rather than call it a breakdown, you would prefer to call it a breakthrough that you had.
I sound like some sort of guru, don't I, when I say that?
What happened to you triggered a journey, really, to look more deeply at what your life had been up until that point. What path did it take you on?
Well, I think what Brock was saying, that you wouldn't choose to have the experiences that I had, like sort of acute mental health issues. Actually, I disagree. I wouldn't swap what happened. The only thing that I would change is to spare the people who love me from watching me go through that, because I was in a very dark place for quite a while. But that pain that we experience, emotional pain, just like physical pain, it is a warning sign to us. It's an alarm to tell us that something is out of balance. And for me, that was what it was. And I think that going through that, and as you're talking about resilience and realizing that we as humans have an incredible reserve of resilience that you don't know you have until you're back up against the wall. And going through that and realizing that learning to rely on myself, and obviously I had amazing people around me, friends and family, to give me support, but really ultimately I had to dig deep into that well of resilience and find a way through it. And what I think that your pain teaches you is not just about yourself, but it gives you an incredible empathy and connection with other people, which has really changed my life. That I feel like I'm connected to people in a way that I wasn't before, because I understand the suffering, and everyone suffers in different ways, and our trauma, one person's trauma can be on a different scale to another, but we all know what it's like to suffer. And for me, talking again about he was saying the worst thing that can happen to someone to lose a child. My best friend in Scotland did lose her child, a 5-year-old boy who I talk about in the first book, and he died very suddenly a few days before Christmas in 2011. And going through what I've gone through and watching what she has gone through, it's connected us in a way, and our experiences are completely different. But she knew when I was in that dark space what it was like to not be able to see your way through the next minute and find a way. And her life now, 7 years on, will never be the same. But she's found a way. She says to me that people should never presume that she's over the loss of her child, but she's found a way. It is possible to live with a broken heart and find a way to find joy and happiness in the everyday. And she's done that. And the connection that I have with her and with people through that experience, and the friendships and the relationships that I have as a result of going through something really awful, has been a gift. And I think the anxiety that I struggle with even to this day is a gift. It's always teaching me something. And that's not to say that people who are in dire needs shouldn't have to go through that. And we have a mental health system that I could talk about endlessly about how broken it is. But I think, as you said, Brock, how do you measure your joy if you don't have anything to pit it against? And if we were just constantly going through life living at our peak happiness, we would get tired of that pretty quickly, and we want more, and we want more, and we want more. And I found that out the hard way. So I think, I don't know if that answers your question, but it's been a really long journey for me. And I've also realized that it's not a journey that finishes at the end of a few sessions of therapy. For me, it's a lifelong journey of learning, and I think that's not what we're taught as kids. We're taught that when you experience pain, emotional pain, you need to get it fixed, and it will be short-lived, and then it's over, and then you're cured. That's not what it's like to be human.
And Brock, that's something that you talk about in your book too, about that importance of connection with others. Some people it feels like some people just flourish in life, and they seem to have it all together. Why is that?
They're so annoying, those people.
That's so annoying.
Yeah, that's $1 million question. If we had the answer to that, we'd all be we wouldn't be here probably. I mean, look, I don't know. I think that there are a number of factors. Again, positive psychology has been good at identifying some of those key strengths that people need to flourish well in life. I think there's quite a number. I think the idea, as Mark pointed out, that people can bounce back from experiences quickly, that agility to move back into, or to deal or respond to things, because things do happen, and some of those feelings do occur, but it's how we respond to them that matters. So yeah, I mean, it's another one of those hard questions. But I think there are multiple factors. But I would say that probably one of the key things is being able to respond well to a range of life events and being able to accommodate those events. And I do think that when we set up expectations, really across the board, that's often where we go wrong. And I think also, the fact is we're not setting those up on our own. We live in an environment, in a social environment where, there's people who are paid big money to set those expectations up for us endlessly and continuously. And living in that environment can be very problematic, and we're not immune to it. And sometimes we don't even realise we're being affected by it. But I do think that plays a very big role as well. One of the things, to go back to your first question, levels of mental illness in Australia and America are significantly higher than in some other countries. And that certainly can't be explained by GDP or other kinds of, basic, I guess concrete well-being, if you like, or objective measures of well-being. So there is something going on there in our societies, and I think it needs to be understood and explained at that level of culture and society a little bit as well. So, yeah.
Mark, who are the most satisfied people in Australia?
There's too many of them. So, I know this is the focus of this topic. We're supposed to focus on the happy people, and because we did last time, we did the unhappy people. But it is easier to talk about the people at the other end, okay? Because they're a smaller group. I mean, just for this talk, I pulled out some numbers, and what I did was I took all the people in our survey today who've done it 5 years in a row. So admittedly, that means I've dropped a few people, maybe some of the more miserable people. Okay, and I looked at who are the people who are persistently saying that they're dissatisfied with their life. Okay, scoring 0, heaven forbid 0, that's really bad, 0 to 5 on the scale, and about 4% of them said this at least 3 times, out of our last 5 interviews. At least 3 or 4 or 5 times, okay? So it's about 4% of all Australians, and I weighted up. Okay, might sound like a small group, but don't forget our unemployment rate's 5%, so 4%, it sounds like it's still a significant number. And who are these people? Well, a lot of them have some sort of disabling health condition, 50% of them, okay, who have a long-term health condition that they say limits their work, okay, in some way, okay. A lot of them not employment, of course. They've got disabling work conditions, but there's a lot of people there who are not employed. They do, but this is not necessarily causal, because it could be a function of the non-employment and disability. They do live in households with low income. They're welfare dependent. And they also tend to be people, there's a lot of variation here, but they tend to be people who lack social networks, who lack those support mechanisms, a lot of single people or, who don't have the support mechanisms that may be what helps you get through tough times. So, these are the people who are the least satisfied. As I said, the rest of us, whether we're happy or not, I can't say that, but we seem quite content on a sort of a day-to-day basis.
So I wonder if we could just finish up and get an idea from each of you about what you would suggest are the key strategies that we could focus on to lift our level of sense of not happiness, but a sense of satisfaction and well-being in life. So I wonder, Jill, first of all?
Well, that's a big question, isn't it? So the entire second part of my book is about the way that I've learned to live a more meaningful and calmer, more connected life. And there's a number of things there. There's a lot of science behind a lot of the things that I've looked at, the science of compassion for yourself and for others. We're a lot happier, we're a lot calmer when we show compassion to people, and that's very difficult in a very divided world, but we're actually hardwired to be kind, and it lowers our blood pressure. It makes us actually makes us live longer if we can show compassion to particularly people who we disagree with, which is difficult, I think, a lot. But the science around play, the art of play, like when we were children, we run with abandon, we dance, we don't care what anyone thinks we look like, and then we grow older, and we start to have this weight of responsibility and a weight of duty, and we don't want to look foolish. And I just have thrown that completely out the window. So now, you quite often find me dancing in Princess Park on my own when I go for a run, and I feel like a song comes on that I'm listening to, and I want to dance. I will just dance and let that little child part of me that wants to run off the leash like a dog at a dog park just. And the science behind that is really strong as well. One of the other things I think is really important for me is to embrace my flaws, to realize that I'm human, to not try and hide the scars that make me who I am. So I talk about in Happy Never After, I look at kintsugi, which is the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with powdered gold. So in that philosophy, they make the broken beautiful, and it's in those seams of gold that hold the vase together that make us who we are. So for me, that's a kind of philosophy for life now. I have a bag that I bought from the School of Life that says emotional baggage written in big letters on the side of it. I carry that around a lot as well because we all have emotional baggage. The trick is to carry it elegantly.
Great. Peggy, what would you suggest?
So, we have focused a lot on sort of some of those perhaps misperceptions we have about happiness and what the good life really is. So I think part of it is actually kind of readjusting what our goal actually is. It's actually about living well as opposed to perhaps living happily. And what we do see with that is a lot of that is little things that we do actually can make a difference. Things like playing in the park or interacting with other people, our social connections, having real connections with others, not necessarily having thousands and thousands of friends, but actually having time to connect with real friends, taking time to notice and appreciate the good things in us and around us, having compassion for ourselves and for others. It's those little things that actually are a way of life and a way of thinking that can actually help us feel good and function well, or accept when we're not feeling well, and to kind of take the highs and lows together.
Mark?
Way outside my field now, so anything I say should probably take with a grain of salt. My concern, I guess, what can we do better? Can we do better at detecting early the sorts of people who are going to have problems later in life? So it seems to me this is early childhood is where we've got to start. And so they've got the parents, but what if the parents are part of the problem? And so then you've got early childhood and schools, okay? But at the same time, we don't want schools to, but it seems to me these are the mechanisms. I mean, I don't know whether all our school teachers now have to become psychologists and therapists, but it seems to me that's where a lot of the problems first will emerge, and you need to detect it early. I mean, the economists have come late to the psychology game. James Heckman telling you that your life success is all determined in your first sort of 3 years. Okay, so I guess this is sort of along those lines. I don't know. The psychologists are all nodding. This is good. Okay,
yeah, good.
Okay, my anxiety levels just dropped.
Can I just to reiterate what Mark is saying? I totally agree, and I look at length in this book about the early childhood years, and I've gone through a lot of therapy, still in therapy. I think we should all have therapy, particularly Donald Trump needs a lot of therapy.
Too late for him.
Too late, but those early, 90% of the brain's development happens before the age of 5, right? And so I traced a lot of my modern day anxiety as a 40-something woman back to those first few years, and it was extraordinary what I found. So I absolutely agree that if we could allow children, it's not necessarily putting them in therapy as children, but allow them, when this is happening more in schools, which is good, to actually express how they're feeling and to acknowledge that it's okay to not feel happy all the time. That would play a really big part, I think, in building more resilient generation.
So Brock, finally.
Yeah, sure. I don't know if it's a final answer, but I think one of the things that psychology has done is, and prior to positive psychology, is to help people to understand how to help people to cope when they fall down. And what that requires is a really quite acute sense of self-awareness. You need to be self-aware to be able to know how to pick yourself back up, how to regulate your emotions, how to get your thinking straight, how to get back on track. But then I think one of the places we've gone wrong is we've sometimes promoted that self-awareness beyond that point. And so we've kind of thought that the way to be happy is to be more and more self-aware, aware of how we're feeling from moment to moment, aware of whether or not we're achieving the things or the goals in life that we want to achieve. But at the end of the day, it's actually sometimes a lack of self-awareness that actually is where you find the things that make you really happy. It's the times when you're not self-aware in the park dancing, and that's when you're no longer aware of you being there, but you're engaged fully. Or it's engaging in other people rather than yourself, where you find a sense of meaning and purpose, being doing things for others rather than doing things for yourself. So I think in some ways, letting go of that self-awareness at some point is really important, and maybe
Great.
Yeah.
So look, please join me. A big thank you to the wonderful panellists. Associate Professor Brock Bastian, Mark Wooden, Peggy Kern and Jill Stark. Thank you so much.